Welcome to another CLD video. In this one we're going to be looking at a final theory, that being of functional theory. Yes, functional theory. So this is the idea that the most important thing to do when you're looking at transcripts of children's speech is not to be focusing on whether evidence of behaviorism or nativism or cognitive theory. No, no, no. The most important thing to do is to look at the purposes or functions behind the child's utterances. Pragmatically, what are they trying to do with their language? Now, this is important, isn't it? Because you might have in the exam, in a transcript, a child in the holophrastic stage. They might be uttering a single word, like the word cake. Now, what does that child mean when they say the word cake? Are they just labeling? Look, there's a cake. Perhaps they're saying, I like cake. Or perhaps they're saying, Mummy, give me some cake. Or maybe they're saying, I really don't like cake, as if anybody would actually say that. Or maybe they're saying, where's the cake? Or maybe they're saying, let's get the cake out the fridge, etc., etc. So even at a relatively unsophisticated stage, where the child is just uttering one single word, there may be a whole range of quite complex functions that underlie it. And of course, parents become quite skilled, quite adept at trying to work out the child's actual purposes behind their quite limited language. Bring on Michael Halliday, as in, we're all going on a Michael Halliday. So Michael Halliday is a researcher who thought that, look, the key thing to look at when you're looking at children's transcripts is the purposes behind the child's utterances. And here he is. He looks like a North Yorkshire farmer to me. So he identified actually 7 different functions that might be used when a child uses language. Okay, and he's suggesting that the intended outcome or the motivation is the key thing, because obviously if that intention is met, then that will motivate the child to use language further. So without any further ado, here are the 7 functions of Michael Halliday. Right, here are the first 4, and I think these first 4 Michael Halliday did identified in his own son's language, and these were the initial purposes that he identified. Particularly the first 2, we're talking instrumental language and we're talking regulatory language. Now, instrumental language is language that's used to try to fulfill a need. It's saying things like, I'm hungry, or, do something for me. So an example would be Nana, gesturing for more banana. So you can see at a very basic level, at the holophrastic stage, quite clearly infants are doing instrumental needs with their language. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the regulatory function. So language used to influence others to make commands or to persuade. Go, says the child when wanting to enter a playground with the caregiver. So instrumental and regulatory functions are the most basic forms of purposes that you've got. Hotly followed by interactional language. So this is language used to build and strengthen social relationships with others. Like, for example, the child saying, love you, aimed at a sibling at bedtime, like that's ever going to happen. Now that's interesting, interactional, because that shows that even at this very early age, children are attuned to realizing that language is not just transactional. It's not just about conveying information or giving instructions. It's about establishing and keeping relationships. So interactional language is about strengthening social relationships with others. And the fourth one that Halliday was noting is personal language. Language is being used to develop a sense of self, to express preferences and opinions, to talk about the self. And bearing in mind cognitive theory that children basically in the first 2 stages are actually quite selfish, they can only perceive the world from themselves. And presumably there's quite a lot of personal language that will be going on. Child saying something like, no like it, describing a new food. Instrumental, regulatory, interactional, and personal are the first tranche of functions. We then move into the other 3, which come a bit later, according to Michael Halliday. we have representational language. So this is language used to request or give information to another participant. I'm eating all my dinner. We then have heuristic function, which is the language used to explore the world around oneself, and it's usually shown by questions. And don't 2 or 3-year-olds use a lot of questions? They're constantly exploring the world around them by asking adults questions about what's happening. Who that? When hearing a knock at the door. This is heuristic language, according to Michael Halliday. And finally, we have imaginative language. So language used to play and to be imaginative, like a child saying dragon. There isn't really a dragon there. It's part of the child's imaginative language. And of course, you would link that in again with stage 2 of Jean Piaget's cognitive theory, because he's saying in stage 2, the pre-operational stage, that actually play and questions are central to the child's linguistic growth. Okay, so we've got instrumental, regulatory, interactional, and personal, followed by representational, heuristic, and imaginative. Now, Halliday is not the only show in town, because there is another researcher called John Doerr. What's on the door, John Doerr? Used to describe children's language. And the labels behind these are more simple, but on the other hand, they are a little bit more limited in terms of demonstrating the different functions of child's language. We have labeling, so simply naming or identifying a person, object, or experience, which is maybe something that a lot of adults do when they're talking with children, and maybe children do, in order to mirror the adult's language. So labeling, repeating, echoing something spoken by an adult. If you're a behaviorist and you think that children ostensibly learn language through copying and imitating, and presumably in their language you're going to see evidence of that in lots of doors repeating. We have answering, which is giving a direct response to an utterance from another speaker. This links in, I suppose, with the idea of social interactionism, that for children to learn language properly, they have to be participatory. They have to be involved in dialogues. So answering. We then have requesting action, which I suppose will link in with regulatory on Halliday's taxonomy, and this is demanding things like food, drink, a toy, assistance, etc. We then have 4 others. We have calling, so attracting attention, sometimes by shouting. We have greeting. We have protesting, objecting to requests, and that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because again, if you believe the behaviorist model, you would think that children are quite kind of pliant and submissive in responding to adults. But actually, anybody who's spent any time with a 2-year-old will know that 2-year-old children actually can be quite awkward, can't they? They don't necessarily just repeat or do things that the adult wants them to do. So there might be actually quite a lot of protesting that's going on. And then finally, the last one of Doerr's functions is practicing, so using and repeating language when no adult is present. Now that's an interesting one, isn't it? It's like you close the bedroom door and sneak downstairs and you hear your child still talking away, yabbering away. And presumably this is Doerr's practicing, which kind of suggests that children have this innate, tendency to use language, even if it's not fulfilling an immediate need in talking with somebody else. And again, it links in, I suppose, with that imaginative function of Michael Halliday. So labeling, repeating, answering, requesting action, calling, greeting, protesting, practicing, and they link very nicely as an alternative to Halliday's 7. Right, let's give you a bit of an exercise. Now this is in the AQA. He reaches for his AQA textbook. So if you look in your AQA textbook on page 112, activity 14, you will see 7 of these sentences. Stop the video there and try and label some of these in terms of Halliday and perhaps Doerr's taxonomy. Okay, I'm assuming that you have done that. So A, what's Daddy doing there? Now, incidentally, most of these are telegraphic pieces of speech where they're non-standard because you've got ellipsis going on, so you've got the missing out. In this case, on A, of the primary auxiliary verb is. What is Daddy doing there? In terms of these functions, however, surely this is heuristic. So this is a child who is asking questions in order to find out what is going on in the environment. So asking questions. B, me like sausages, mummy. Again, it's non-standard, and there you've got the non-standard use of the pronoun here, because what you've got here is a first-person singular object rather than subject pronoun. In standard English, it would be I. Now, what is the function of this? It could be a whole range of different things, couldn't it? In terms of Halliday, it could be regulatory, it could be, or rather, I should say, instrumental. So saying, I would like some sausages, mummy, so giving a request. On the other hand, it could be a personal piece of information, conveying an individual opinion. Or it could be representational, in that it's giving some information. So there is a range of different things it could be, according to Halliday. Need juice now is a very direct imperative that we've got there. So we surely have got regulatory language there. And let's bring in door on this. This is surely requesting action. We're going on a trip to the moon today. Ha! Now, unless you're actually Buzz Aldrin talking to Neil Armstrong, then this is likely to be imaginative, isn't it? So we've got imaginative language here, and maybe we've got representational language as well, where language is being used to convey facts and opinions. On E, got new shoes, Granny. Okay, so surely this is representational. This is conveying facts and opinions. It's giving information. And on F, love you, Ruthie. Surely that's interactional. So this is language being used to maintain social relationships. And then on G, don't do that. Going back to door, that's requesting action, or in this case, actually requesting inaction, and it's regulatory language. So as you can see there, we've mostly used Michael Halliday with occasional references to John Doerr. It just depends on the transcript that you've got in front of you in the exam. And the key thing is that these things are not set in stone, and you might actually have a very young child who is doesn't seem to be hitting any of these functions and purposes that neither Doerr nor Halliday have been talking about. That's okay to point out. Okay, so if you were actually using this information in the exam, I would point you towards this little bit of transcript. Now, in your booklet, if you're in my class, this would be on page 101, and this is taken from the specimen paper from the AQA, where we've got Joey. Hey, Joey! And he's 3.5 years old. To be precise, he's 3 years, 5 months old. He's going upstairs to his room, and he's with his caregiver. Okay, so Joey says, you have to crawl. And the adult says, I have to crawl up the stairs as well, do I? I'm the winner. Oh, so you're the winner, are you? Yes. So if we were to analyze this in terms of functional theory, we can see some interesting things that are going on. First of all, on that first line there, you have to crawl. Surely this is evidence of Halliday's regulatory function, and also Doerr's requesting action. So he's telling the adult what to do, and he's using very direct language, presumably because he only has fairly limited language skills. You know, he may be creeping into the post-telegraphic stage in terms of the structural model of language, but that doesn't mean to say that this person has mastered all of the subtleties and pragmatic features of polite speech. So he's using language in a very direct monosyllabic way, and if that were an adult talking, you would possibly interpret that as being a face-threatening act. It's not a mitigated imperative, it's a direct imperative. So here is a child who is speaking broadly in standard English, but pragmatically still has a lot to learn about things like negative face. Joey then says, I'm the winner. So here we've got Joey's imaginative function, where presumably Joey is imagining that he's been involved in a competition, in a race. And again, the focus is on himself, isn't it? So this is fairly characteristic of children in the first sort of 3, 4, 5 years of their life. Essentially, they see the world in an egotistical way. Some of us never move out of that stage, and it focuses on its own achievement, and it kind of lacks politeness. So it shows another face-threatening act. Okay, and then finally, we've got Joey's answer to the adult. The adult says, "So you're the winner, are you?" And Joey says, "Yes." So you could argue that this is Door's answering function. And so what we've got here is Joey completing the adjacency pair with a preferred response. Notice how we're using the language here from discourse. So adjacency pair and preferred response using the language of discourse. Okay, so it's very useful to be able to draw upon occasionally Halliday and Dorr when you're analysing transcripts in the exam or even on your investigations, your language investigations. Okay, thank you very much.